Welcome to Mark My Words, a podcast that not only aims to inspire and teach the listener about entrepreneurship, it also aims to give my guests an opportunity to talk about their unique journey in entrepreneurship and life. So join me and my guests as we meet at the crossroads on Mark My Words. So today on Mark My Words, my guest not only has a really awesome, strong background in nonprofit, which I can't wait to talk about, but they also have something really, really cool in common with me and something that's really close to my 5-year-old heart. I was reading Christian Lefer's LinkedIn profile prior to doing this episode, and he made references to the Underdog cartoon from the 1960s, one of my absolute favorite cartoons growing up, talking all about Simon Bar Sinister and robbing people's potential away and taking over their minds, and it's bringing back a flood of memories. And if you didn't grow up in that 60s, 70s, early mid 80s time period, you probably don't know what we're talking about. Go to YouTube and look up Underdog. The episodes are there. It was one of the most brilliant cartoons of all time. And I had to open this show talking about that. Christian Lefer, he is the founder of InstantNonprofit. He is CEO of Yippee Kaye Nonprofit Solutions. He is just, he is Mr. Nonprofit as far as I'm concerned. And he is here on Mark My Words. Christian, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Super excited to be here. I am fantastic, Mark. And yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned the underdog. I sort of didn't forget, but that's a little bit in the rear view that I put that on there. But I love that we have that in common because I remember, you've got Simon Bar Sinister and his henchmen, and their job is to go turn people into these zombies that their eyes go googly eyed, and they go, I will do what Simon says. And so they lose their own humanity and their own identity to kind of becoming an unwitting dupe of this mastermind evil guy. And then underdog, who seems very inept and sometimes is, comes along and ends up saving the day in spite of himself. So I just love that entire model, and I've always been out to help the underdog, and it's what makes me it's what makes me go. And then that's tied to your mention of Yippee Kaye, which I probably should clarify that a little bit. The company corporate name actually is still Yippee Kaye, because whether you're a Bruce Willis fan or Gene Autry, more of the diehard or the helpful cowboy, it's all about shedding light into the darkness, fighting the bad guys, and opening up a way for people to live and succeed and thrive, no matter which persona you like about Yippee Kaye. The problem I ran into is in all my genius, try spelling Yippee Kaye when you're trying to remember that company that helps you start nonprofits, or go to the URL or whatever. And plus, without running into all the expletives that go along with the Bruce Willis version. So we ended up rebranding as Instant Nonprofit, but Yippee Kaye is still that sort of irreverent, fun, get it done and help people, whatever the cost, sort of persona that we embody, internally here. And we really want to convey that to people and empower them with it.
Well, first of all, thanks for clearing all that up. Secondly, I respect you a lot, now that you mention it, for even making that a company name. That really is kind of a complex word. It's a very cool word, but it's like, wow, how do you even spell that? I mean, a grammar
Exactly.
spelling snob like me, I'm even like, I don't know how to spell that word. So yeah, I think that's amazing. And then one one thing I want to say, one last thing about Underdog, it wasn't necessarily Underdog who was inept. It was Shoeshine Boy, his alter
Exactly.
ego. That was the part of it
Yes.
that was inept.
Thank you. Yes, that's an important distinction.
It is. Yeah, I didn't realize I had so much passion for that cartoon still until I read your bio. I'm like, oh my god, he loves Underdog. That's amazing.
Yeah, it might, Gary Vaynerchuk is known for his goal in life is to like buy the New York Jets. And that's how he'll know he really made it in life. And he's like, he just says, he talks about this all the time. And one of my secret missions in my life is, can I buy the Underdog franchise and just like own that little piece of the history or something? It's just silly, but it's one of those things that's fun to muse about. And I like to look at things sometimes in what I consider altimeter goals. It shows you the height you've gotten to. It doesn't really have to do with how you got there or where you're going. It's just what height have you gotten to by some, readout. And I have a couple of those readout altimeter goals, I call them, that just say, hey, you've sort of made it if, it's not the money in the bank. It's the fact that you have, a 1980s hair band that you're in doing covers for like nobody who cares, right? It's these little things that say, this kind of means that I made it in a way that is meaningful instead of like, oh, I want to have X dollars in the bank or I want to have 5% body fat, which I'll never have.
Well, it's interesting what you're talking about feeling like you made it. I always had a vision of myself where I would get to this point where I would just have this overwhelming feeling of like euphoria and just complete peace. And in that moment, I would put my feet up on the desk and just be like, I'm not motivated. I have made it. I've done what I want to do. And the thing that I've learned about that is that I think it's very, very, very unlikely that I'm ever going to feel that way, at least until I'm very old and can no longer do anything, I guess.
Totally, totally. Very old or very dead, right?
Very dead. Yeah, that too. I didn't really want to take it there, but well, since we're going there, I mean, yeah, well, I think that was more or less what I was thinking.
Absolutely. The
So,
deathbed conversation can almost be cliche anymore, because like coaching and personal improvement has itself become cliche in many ways. And, everybody's trying to be their best and follow their dream and all that stuff. But these altimeter goals are a thing that like you can say are at least just a milestone, right? Because you're never people like you, and I hope I always keep this quality about me, will always want to do something else. I'm like, what is retirement? I can't even relate, right? I always want to do good things, and even if I have, say, some money in the bank or I'm comfortable or whatever, it's never about that, And I have another really big altimeter goal. Like this means my company made it, and it's not some monetary payoff, but it's this idea that I have that I'd be like, okay, that means that I've done okay. I've done some other things would have to be in place for this to be in existence. So that's kind of how I try to look at goals and targets anymore, because it just feels money or certain things that you want to write down when you're like doing your New Year's goal setting just don't feel that exciting.
no, I totally understand that, and I think for me, one of my goals was to just take a little bit more control over my life and give myself the freedom to be doing things like I'm making more time to be doing, like this podcast, and to keep that going and to give myself time to maybe pursue other things I've always wanted to do. So I feel like I'm inching more and more in that direction, which is amazing. And it's just all about staying on task and staying within your goals. So that's amazing. I feel like you definitely have a more defined system than I do. I'm just kind of like shooting at the hip and kind of just living my life like I don't know. But one thing that I am organized on is where I want to take this conversation to next, which is talking a little bit about how you got here. And I saw that politics, at least from what I can see, has been a passion of yours for a long time. You majored in political science. Did you know before you even went to college that you wanted to be involved in something political?
Yeah, so that's it's an interesting topic. You know, when I was a kid, um I had a single my mom was a single mom, and my dad was kind of an entrepreneur, uh but not a lot of guidance, not a lot of like, here's how life works. Kind of grew up very much a feral child, figuring out things on my own and just like riding my bike into the woods and, you know, figuring out where I was. Oh, it's getting a little dark. I wonder what town we're in, out in the woods in North Jersey. Or throwing an inner tube in the river and then just going as long as I could. And then I'm like, well, I'm kind of tired. It's dinner time. I wonder where we are, going to some general store. Hey, mom, can you pick me up? And so, but that's kind of been very similar and analogous to my career path. Um, I just thought I would get a job when I could get a job and have some money and stuff. And then I realized there's sort of that blue collar, gas station worker money trap. And you start getting used to paying for things. And then how are you going to go to college and not have any money coming in and all that stuff? But I did make it to college eventually. And I remember I wasn't sure of my major. They're like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. Business. How do you pick? That seems like a really big decision. And so I remember I was a business major, and one day uh, I realized that wasn't really floating my boat. And I took this, and I read a lot as a kid. So I took this history course with Dr. Melvin Weissman. This guy could have taught at Harvard, but he taught at the community college that I started out at. This person was brilliant. And that professor would be able to transport you to ancient Mesopotamia. And you're just feeling it, the way he would describe things and the way he would introduce you to these different world history topics, to me was like, I was just done. I was just like hopelessly interested in that stuff, and switched my major to history, and eventually it was history, poli sci. So fast forward, I'm in college at Rutgers University, which is like, we call it Harvard on the Hill, Harvard Ivy League for the regular guy. And they did have it's a big school in North Jersey, and they have great professors, and it's an old school, a lot of tradition. And I ended up taking a class with someone whose dad was in Solidarity in Poland, right? When the fall of the Iron Curtain, like his dad was like one of the guys like risking being shot by organizing the shipyard workers in Poland and saying, enough of this communism. And I remember him transporting me to that time where he and his dad would drive around to the checkpoints in Eastern Europe, handing bottles of vodka to get through from one country to the other and stuff. And I remember being very motivated about people that I couldn't believe that, unlike America, people in other parts of the world were shackled to these systems that didn't allow them to be their best. So I got involved in what I would say, I hate to use the word politics, and politics has become so polarizing. I became very passionate about certain issues, primarily freedom, and for people to direct their own path. And so I got involved in some organizations that helped direct legislation and held people accountable who were in office to the principles of liberty that I came to cherish, because I believe in the underdog, and I want the little guy to have the biggest chance. And I believe the system that has offered that, for all its flaws, is right here in the United States under our constitutional system of law. Now it's hard anymore to bring these things up without people dividing along party lines. So I always like to say, I was party agnostic. If you were against freedom, you were on my list.
Fair enough. And I mean, I'm kind of like the same way. I mean, I have obviously grown up through the same era and have seen, I mean, I feel like when we were growing up, politics wasn't really like the topic that it is today. It's not, it was a much different world. It's not that politics wasn't important, but it wasn't like the cutthroat environment that it is today. And I actually had kind of interest in being I my minor was public administration, and I had kind of an interest in political things myself. I think I was definitely a little more politically like minded when I was younger, but as we've gotten into the 21st century, I mean, I have I'm a much different person. I'm not going to necessarily say I've lost interest or don't have any interest, but I definitely don't have the personality to be like fighting some of the battles that are going on today. I'm just like, look, I just want us to have the best world and the safest, the best, the most fair world that we can possibly have. And I don't know if that's like a cop out or whatever, but that's just kind of how I feel. I'm not really like, absolutely adamant one side or the other or whatever. And I think at this point in my life, if I did feel that strongly politically, this would be a completely different podcast than it is. But that's
Yeah.
basically where I stand. Like I'm definitely behind you on how you feel about that.
I appreciate your perspective on that. And, you know, I think everyone, if they were faced with, if they realized how rare in history the point of all the comforts and the systems that we have that simply just work, some of which we've seen breaking down in the pandemic, supply chains are like, as a matter of fact, I love Jack White, right? I'm a big fan of Jack White and White Stripes and Raconteurs and Dead Weather. God, they're great. He is calling his new tour the Supply Chain Issues Tour, which I just find so funny because this is this whole new idea that's come into our consciousness by not having what we want when we want it every second. And some people are saying, oh, this is good, for people to not get everything they want and all that stuff. And I get consumerism's out of control and all of that stuff. And there's a lot of waste that's really unnecessary. But what this brings up to me is just an appreciation of what we do have and how we have had the ability to access the things and situations in this country to more than any other to make those decisions to direct our own lives. And so I was really happy, like you said, everything's hyper politicized. And I think that is unfortunate that the only thing that really changed about politics, right? The president doesn't affect your personal life any more than really they ever did, which is very little. I always like this. I have this law of the inverse relationship of political power. I call this law that I made up. The level of power somebody has over your personal life is directly inversely proportionate to the level of their office, meaning the guy that inspects your toilet plumbing and your new bathroom construction can really screw up your life, but the president can hardly do anything to really screw up your life. So the little guy that's the little tyrant in the local bureaucracy who just doesn't like that you went a little too far before getting that plumbing inspection can make everything in your household literally stop. And so people have unfortunately been convinced to give up only their perception of power. And people are in couples therapy over politics. People are losing friends over vax, no vax, and all this stuff. And I think it's an unfortunate thing that their wool has been pulled over the eyes of so many people, that this stuff really, like, what's the importance really? It's out of kilter. And so I think that's it's important, to recognize things like the movie The Social Dilemma, where these very smart people and very smart institutions, big tech, government, et cetera, has learned how to turn their system into a dopamine extraction machine and extract dopamine from people very systematically. And the only way to combat that is to recognize what's going on and to take your power back. And I hope if there's anything anyone gets, whatever it is I do, or we're going to talk about anything else, that's the most important thing, is how can people bring back the level of power, perceived power that they have in their lives, the massive amount of power they do have to own the trajectory of their lives, and not feel like they're these cogs that are being controlled, even if that's true to an extent, by these external forces.
Well, let's talk a little bit about you using your own power and how you developed your career. And we obviously have established that, you had this deep rooted passion for politics, and you're wanting change and you're wanting things to be a certain way, and you got yourself very heavily involved in the nonprofit world. Explain how that started for you.
Absolutely. Issue advocacy, as I mentioned, what you could call politics, is an inherently negative game. And so no matter how good you are, if you really remain true to principle and don't allow yourself to be bought off with little trinkets and baubles, to be somebody important in somebody else's organization or party or hierarchy, you don't end up with any friends, and you're constantly fighting battles. Because of the way humans are constructed in their minds, the fear of loss is, I estimate, about 20 times more powerful than the hope of gain, right? If you say, hey, to somebody, hey, I can show you how to make 20 bucks. They're like, all right, yeah, that might be interesting. But then if you tell that same person, hey, you just had $1 stolen from you by this person, or you're about to have $1 stolen, 1/20th of the value, people will just crawl over broken glass to not only get the dollar back, but to make the person pay who's trying to take it from them, right? There's just this, it's fear of missing out. It's because we're constructed, through the way people have evolved. We used to have to run around and look out for danger all the time and everything. And that runs so much of how our neurotransmitters and how our response systems work, that fear is really powerful. So I just was really happy to get out of that and into something where it was always still about empowering the little guy. And so when I was 8 years old, my mom sat me down one day when she came back from the doctor with my little 4-year-old sister, almost 4. And she explained to me that my little sister, Monique, wasn't speaking yet at this, almost 4 years old, because she never would. It turned out she was developmentally disabled, what we called back in the 70s, mentally retarded. And of course, I didn't have any other sisters to compare her to. And I was like, okay, mom, Monique's fine with me. And I went back outside to play with my friends. But fast forward to about 2010, I went to start a nonprofit, a 501c3. And I remember finding out, as I called, the IRS to learn a little bit more, becoming morally outraged when they told me it takes a year to get approved, and that it's very complicated. And I started looking at all the horror stories people go through to do something good for someone like my sister. And so this childhood origin story, right? The background in my life, I grew up around Special Olympics. I mean, I just came to realize as an adult, wow, all these cool people did all this nonprofit stuff to help people like my sister. That is so amazing. Then I go to start one and I realize how difficult it is. And moral outrage kicked in. And I said, this is bullshit. Somebody has to solve this, because I found so many people. Well, I was going to start a nonprofit, but I couldn't figure out the application, or I got rejected, or a lawyer took my money and I never got the around to finishing it, and I ran through their retainer, and now I just still work at my old job, you know? And so I set about solving this. And so I called the IRS. They gave me an extension, like a phone number, you know, 855, whatever. And I decided I was going to find out one way or the other why would this was such a ridiculous, outrageous process. So I changed the last two numbers in the phone number they gave me. And I just kept calling one extension after another, knowing I'd probably get somebody in that same department. And I started putting together, I begged, pleaded, and cajoled answers out of these agents that would answer about what makes a perfect 501c3 application. Why does some nonprofits get approved and others don't? What's the biggest thing they see that could improve their day? And I created what I called a love letter to a bureaucrat. So if I was trying to impress someone, you know, at the IRS, what kind of file would I send? I mean, it would just be beautiful. It would have table of contents and chapters and watermarked EIN, which is an identifying number. And they'd be able to drop this thing in a room full of paper and easily put it back together. It would totally make sense. They could stamp the file approved, and they could go out to lunch early, which is what every desk worker wants to do. And so I tried my process once I had put all this stuff together. And lo and behold, in the face of a normal 1-year approval, I got my approval back in about 40 days. And I mean, I was just like over the moon. So that was kind of my path of discovery, from just innocently trying to start a nonprofit, and then becoming activated and deciding that I would make this easier for other people.
Wow, that's really remarkable. Is this like a process that you teach other people who want to start a nonprofit? Is this just something that you've held to yourself and have just continued to build on with all the other things that you've been trying to do?
Yeah, I would say it's something that makes me, you know, like who I am, that sort of, I don't take no for an answer if it's something that is wrong, you know. And I think there you go. It's the underdog thing again. Like this has to be fixed. And so what I realized is that, you know, people are only going to do certain things once or twice in their whole life. So they don't need to know how to build a car to drive a car, right? The car is there to get them somewhere. And so it's the same thing with a nonprofit. The entity, the incorporation, the EIN, the 501c3 application, all the board documents, all the things that we provide for people at my company are just a vehicle. What they provide is they know where they want to go. And so if I can remove barriers from them actualizing their mission, how many more people can they help, right? So our mission is to bend the arc of history by finding all these people that want to do good things and handing them a vehicle that they can use to get there. But that attitude about not accepting the status quo definitely is in everything we teach. Like for fundraising, when we take people, so we have the 5 steps of a nonprofit, which are seed, startup. Seed is like that need people have to start something and make a change. Startup is the entity setting up the vehicle, right? The nonprofit. Systemize is like, okay, how do I make this work for me and not make it my life really hard? Scale is fundraising and growing the thing, getting the volunteers and the staff that you need. And then of course, stewardship or sustainability is the 5th stage in the nonprofit, where it kind of just runs. And if you step on that proverbial banana peel, or as we talked about earlier, when we're old and gray and we just can't do that anymore, this thing can live on unless it fulfills its cause, which is like the ultimate. So when we talk about fundraising and scaling and making systems, there has to be some belief that what you're doing is important enough to have very creative ways around every obstacle. So I do try to bring that into everything that I do in life and everything I teach. How can we look at a problem, even if other people have run into it, and kind of be like Elon Musk is with rockets and electric cars, and go back to first principles and say, what can we do to not let that be a barrier and get real creative about it. And people want to go immediately to the how. And I constantly am pulling people back that I talk to the why and the what. Because then when you're sleeping in the middle of the night, that powerful subconscious of yours and the divine even can inspire you on a brand new how.
So if I wake up tomorrow and I'm like, I feel really strongly about this particular topic, I want to start a nonprofit, but I don't want to do all that work to make that happen. That's when I come to you and you have this system and you can help to make that nonprofit a reality. Am I understanding that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, what we do is take your idea and turn it into an IRS approved 501c3 nonprofit in, on average, or for most of our customers, under 30 minutes of work on your part for about a third of what an attorney would charge, with an absolute 100% guarantee that this is going to happen. We do run that ball into the end zone no matter what. If the IRS has additional questions, or they kind of pull you aside for the additional TSA inspection randomly, we're there with you through the entire process. And so we've translated the entire thing that the IRS and the state would put you through into English. We collect only the information we need and one time correctly. And then we drive that process through no matter what, with kind of that won't take no for an answer. Because as we've seen with the pandemic, I mean, systems are breaking down, and we've watched different states go from a week to approve articles to 5 weeks, and then somebody new comes into to run the department, and we have to roll with all that. You shouldn't have to worry about that. You should be able to stay focused on your mission, and we believe that's how we're going to change the world, is by helping you focus on your mission while we take care of all these details on a process that you'll probably only have to do. You probably only be called to do this once or twice. You shouldn't become an expert. What you should become an expert at is articulating your mission to the people that you want to help you, and then being able to bring in the resources and raise the money to fuel that mission. And that's where I get really passionate and excited, because I basically tripped over in the nonprofit space. I tripped over fundraising as an art and as an invitation to people to a bigger life instead of sales, totally accidentally. But once I cracked that code, I was like, okay, this is going to be a lot of fun.
So if let's see, I lost my train of thought because I'm tired. I was gonna ask something and now I blanked on what I was gonna ask. So one thing that I can say to kind of keep this conversation going somewhat smoothly here is one thing that crossed my mind when you were talking is, so I was born with cleft lip and palate, and that came with a lot of obstacles in my life. And it's always been kind of like a dream of mine to kind of like pay that forward. It crossed my mind about starting a nonprofit and whatever. And in my mind, before we did this episode, my vision of that was always like, I gotta do all this work, I gotta do all these things, and didn't realize that there were people out there like you doing this kind of work. And I know that there are a lot of organizations that represent, cleft lip and palate and all that stuff and craniofacial. But for me to be where I'm at in life and to do something like that just on my own behalf would be like amazing. So for me personally, to know that you exist is really amazing. And I actually now remember what I stumbled on because I said all that stuff. I knew there was a reason I wanted to say all that. I wanted to ask you, are there any organizations that you've helped to build up that you're like most proud of? Like, I'm sure you're proud of all your work. All your work without knowing who you've helped or what you've really done, like in depth, is amazing. But what are you like most proud of?
I would say that the organizations that are, I mean, I love all of our organizations, and we have packages from very affordable, right? Somebody just needs to get that nonprofit done. It still includes a done for you, absolutely everything you need. It's easier for me to say what's not included because we're limited on time here. Nothing is not included, even in our most basic package, which is about $1,000. We have packages all the way up to $6,000, which include more fundraising help and how to operationalize some of your organization, for people maybe who have big ambitions and have maybe had a track record of success. We have a lot of entrepreneurs who they built 1, 2, 3 businesses, and now they want to really put a nonprofit together that's going to be like the next Charity Water or something. But I don't look at any of those as like better than the other, because the person down the street from me who is helping kids with some deficiency, or a sports league or something, is like, I just have so much reverence for everyone who is doing something to help someone else. But true to my overall enthusiasm and belief in the unlimited potential that people have that they're unaware of, I love the organizations that are helping to bring a greater level of consciousness or awareness of human potential. So sort of human potential oriented nonprofits are exciting to me. And I have a couple of examples, whether it's there are some advanced coaching that's available to people. Like I'm a fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. People can learn to meditate in a way that opens their mind to possibility in a very advanced way, right? So there are some nonprofits that are out to help people understand those things and actualize a better life through those things. Those excite me. And a lot of times the people that need it most, I'm a foster parent. I've adopted a little girl, my daughter Josie. And sometimes the people that come out of, say, the foster care system, or people who grew up in a very challenging environment, or had a disability or something, they're the last people who can afford this advanced coaching. And so I love bringing things that can help people that usually you have to spend a lot of money to get access to those things. I love the organizations that are bringing those high levels of help to people who could never afford it. That's great, right? Because the people that need it the most often are the ones that can't afford the things that will help them break those patterns and those limiting beliefs and things like that. So, and then there's there's coaching. There's all kinds of different modalities of this. We got a psychedelic church approved fairly recently, and so many soldiers and even people who have had trauma in their lives are being healed through psychedelics. And Tim Ferriss, is very much about that, and he's raising money for a whole wing of Johns Hopkins University to study this stuff. I get excited about those projects. One of my clients right now is starting a sustainable land and community projects all over the world that will have healing and therapeutic retreats. And they're teaching people about blockchain. And they believe that the money supply increase and the Instagram society and all these things that people really don't feel great about are eventually going to break down, that our systems might break down, and we might need a more genuine model for society. That one really excites me. So that's such a huge, big ambition, right? To create something that can help people when some of these things break down, and inflation or access to a real life and a more better model for relationships and all that stuff. That same thing is like Steve Jobs saying, here's to the crazy ones, right? That great ad campaign of Apple. And he showed Einstein, a bunch of other weirdos who turned out to be geniuses, but every genius idea starts out as a crackpot idea.
Well, let me tell you, you're a very interesting guest for me because a lot of the guests I've had some kind of a crossroads in their life, and we all have crossroads. I mean, there isn't anybody who doesn't really have a crossroads, but you kind of just stepped right into the entrepreneurial world pretty much right off the bat. I mean, this has pretty much been all you've done your entire career, correct? You haven't had like any other type of job, right?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was mixed up. I was a mixed up kid and I didn't really have a lot of direction. I had 42 jobs before I discovered this issue advocacy path. And some of them were for a day or a week. I'd get a cold calling job or slinging steaks in a kitchen of a restaurant. I'd be like, okay, this is definitely not what I'm looking for. And even once I found what I thought was my path, right, doing this issue advocacy and then moving into nonprofits, about a few years back, I was trying to do everything that I could to grow this company, be a dad, be a husband, and do all these things according to what I thought was the way of going about it. But what I didn't realize is that because of my upbringing, I had some very negative beliefs and some very negative ways of going about things. And I pretty much got to a point where everything in my life suddenly was absolutely burning and absolutely on fire. I was separated, and I didn't have a great relationship with my kids, and I had tried to make this company work, and absolutely just everything I tried became the harder I tried, the worse things went, and I got to a point where I lost everything. I literally was just everything was not working. And then I had this one day that I realized, I mean, I am out of my house. I don't even have a car. I lost my car in the process. And this after I like raised money for the company and thought everything was just going to go so great, and everything crumbled. And I realized that it was all on me. And I didn't really want to live another day like this. But at the same time, I knew that there had to be some reason to exist. And so I remember on the day that I realized that I had pretty much lost everything, and that the conclusion came to me that all of these ideas and all of my resourcefulness and my intelligence and all these gifts that I've had through my life were only going to make things worse for myself. And I let go of everything was like the beginning of wisdom. And I realized that I was very hard on myself. And I happened to have already planned to go to this transformational workshop for 4 days that really sort of tore down a lot of ideas and then allowed you to rebuild your identity and your mind and your mindset and everything from scratch. And I was in the perfect place for it. And I remember looking in a mirror. Everybody had to look in a mirror. And this was after a couple of days of processes where you kind of assessed your life. And I apologized to myself like I was another person. I would pick up the smelliest hippie with their dog on the side of the road, give them a ride, put them up at a hotel, buy them food if they were hungry. And I realized I'd never done that for myself. All I would do is drive myself harder. If I made a mistake, I would criticize myself and say, what the F is wrong with you and all this. And these were all tape recordings that had been put into me by my childhood and stuff. Well, when I let go of that and I realized I really didn't know anything, but that I was willing to reassess absolutely everything, I just had this feeling of love and this feeling of like acceptance that came over me. And ever since then, all of the things that I lost have come back to me on my own terms by being willing to truly accept what is and Eckhart Tolle, I read The Power of Now, and I had these experiences that equipped me to be super resilient and super accepting, while still having I'm still that lower middle class from Jersey in some ways, and I'm a driver and I want what I see an outcome and I'm like, I gotta get that. But I've also had this ability to love myself for the first time in my life and accept um, things that don't go my way without taking it personally and thinking something's wrong with me. And that has allowed me to live such a better life. And since the outer is a reflection of the inner, the company is doing well. The relationship with my kids and my life, I'm divorced now in the aftermath of that, but it saved my life to have this experience, I think, and I wouldn't want to go back and do anything any other way. So it has been a very hard trail, but much harder until I had that sort of breakdown and rebuilding awakening process.
Wow, that is a story that I can really relate to on a lot of levels. And I know I myself had to really get into adulthood before I just kind of sorted through a lot of my baggage and learned how to love myself more. And it really is a process, and it's a process that you really gotta have those conversations with yourself and really just be in touch with like who you really are and who you want to be and just accepting who you are. And I can totally relate to the battle that you were fighting. I know that's a battle that I kind of fought myself for a long time, and frankly sometimes I still feel like I'm fighting that fight,
Oh
and
yeah.
I may fight that battle the rest of my life, but I definitely can say that I put in the time and the energy, and I'm definitely in a much better place than I've ever been. So I totally relate to your story and definitely commend you for as I'm clapping for your victory. I mean, you've come a long way and you've got an amazing thing going. And yeah, it's been really amazing hearing your story today. And I think before we round home and wrap up this episode, I do want to ask you, because you're doing something that's so like niche and unusual. I gotta ask what your advice would be to anybody who either wanted to take on the type of entrepreneurial endeavor that you're doing with nonprofit, or if you just wanted to start a nonprofit of your own. Like, what's your, that's a very loaded question, but what would be your advice?
Sure. And thanks for asking for that. And thank you for sharing, that you've been on that journey and that path, and that sometimes, I agree with you. I do incredibly what I used to call stupid things or whatever, just things that don't work. I still do them all the time. I'm very absent-minded. I kind of am thinking about things all the time and I try to be as present as I can, but like, I'll drive somewhere and I left my gym bag at home, or, uh, things that I used to just get so mad at myself. And now I'm like, well, I have certain coping mechanisms like my iPhone or whatever, but I don't beat myself up as much as I used to. And I appreciate you saying that you've had to do that work. And it really is work. It's the scariest thing in the world is to face yourself um and just be very real with that and not kind of distract yourself and sedate yourself or invest in things that are fleeting, because ultimately when we pass from this life to the next, we do that alone. And all the love and all of the history and all of the family and all that, that's great. But we all ultimately have to sit with ourselves at some point and, you know, be with that. Um, so if someone wants to even consider, starting a nonprofit or know somebody who wants to do that, they can get an awesome gift that will sort of place them along that hero's journey that I described, that I've been on, we're all on. You know, everybody is the hero in their own story, whether they realize it or not. And so we've got a nice, you know, roadmap that we call it. And what I love about the roadmap that we give to people is, yes, it shows you where you can go next if you want to start a nonprofit or what to do, but it gives people the credit for having lived the life they already lived, because everything that you've done up to this point, for better or worse, totally screwing up or not, whatever, you've put in the miles, and no one's put in the miles and got the experience and the journey that you have. And that is everything that you need to go make a difference in the world, other than organizing those passions that you now have to address something maybe you or somebody else experienced that you want to fix. You just need to direct that energy in the right way, in the right order. And that's what we can help you do. We can't help you with that passion that you have, or we can't help you have a different experience that you've had. But man, every single person on this planet has said to themselves at some point, man, I want to do something about that. And now it's just about directing the energy in the right order, in the right direction, and doing very practical things like getting paid by your own nonprofit. People think you can't do that. You are the best person to get paid by the nonprofit you start. We can show you how to do that. So if you go to instantnonprofit.com/mark my words, MARC, instantnonprofit.com/mark my words, you can have a strategy call. You can get this roadmap, and you can just find out a little bit more. We have a free boot camp on what it takes before you start a nonprofit, and then what it's like once you do.
Well, I'll tell you what, I talked earlier about the whole putting your feet on the desk and feeling like you've made it. I always feel like I've made it a little bit anytime I become like a coupon or advertisement. That's just incredible. So it's I am honored to be a part of that with you. So thank you for that, and I definitely hope that people come your way because you have so much wisdom on a topic that's like really important, and you have, as far as I know, I don't know of too many people that are like doing what you're doing. So I think it was really amazing to have you on this show today and to learn about what you do for nonprofit. It, this was an incredible hour ish. Not quite an hour. We're getting close to an hour, but it was great hearing from you. I don't know if you have any other social media or any other way that anybody can get a hold of you.
Yeah, we're at facebook.com/instant nonprofit. Twitter, they didn't quite give you enough characters, so it's instant nonprofit with the I in profit removed, so it's like instant nonprofit. And certainly LinkedIn. So that's all on our available from our website at instantnonprofit.com. But if they go to /mark my words, they can get sort of some easy ways to enter into this conversation and just think about things. But you know, you're an inspiration to me as well. I listened to your podcast with Eva Payne, for example, who started an awesome nonprofit, and you talked about your background in broadcasting and some pivots that you had to make and everything. And so I just want to really thank you for being what I consider my newest friend, or whatever. I'd love to stay in touch and really wish you the best. I'd love to have a chat with you again sometime soon.
Hey, my door is always open. And speaking of pivots, I'm still making pivots. I feel like I've been pivoting my whole adult life with my career. So I'm used to the pivot, I guess. But Christian, it was really great having you on today. And I think that's about all the time we have for this episode. This was Christian Lefer again of Instant Nonprofit. And go check him out. I mean, he has incredible wisdom on the nonprofit world, and it was a pleasure listening to your story and learning about you. And that is all we have for this episode. So I'm Mark Schmidt. This was Mark My Words, and you can find me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Nimrod1979. That's a handle I've had for like over 10 years. I refuse to change it. I'm also at Mark My Words 6 on Instagram. Also, Nimrod79 if you want to connect with me there. Again, Green Day fan for life. I've been using the Nimrod handle for many, many moons. So if you ever want to find me, Nimrod79 is a good way to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always conducting a conversation about entrepreneurship there. And you can also find me on the Wisdom app, where I'm a mentor for the Wisdom app. And this is an app where you do one on one talks with people about topics that you're passionate about. And I believe I'm just there at Mark Schmidt. So just to kind of tell everybody how to find me, that's how you can find me. But this was Mark My Words. I'm Mark Schmidt. This was Christian Lefer. And thanks for listening. I'll be back with a new episode soon. And so long for now.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy day to listen to Mark My Words. If you would like to connect with me beyond the show, you can find me on LinkedIn at Mark Schmidt, where I will be talking about entrepreneurship, careers, and anything else that is on my mind. You can also connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Nimrod1979 and Nimrod79 respectively. This podcast also has a page on Instagram at Mark My Words. And finally, if you want to leave me a voicemail or check out what I'm up to with the podcast, come find me at podpage.com/mark-my-words. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back with a new episode soon. Bye for now.